Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the next session on layout planning for hospitals. We are almost done. Next week we have the last lecture, and then we only will have a Q&A, and the term is over. So I've heard last week Dr. Bergau presented his work or his insights, and there were only 6 of you present, which is pretty disappointing. I mean, you are the wrong ones to blame. But they're doing it for free, so we're not paying them, and it's always difficult to get these practical insights. So that's was a pretty sad notice I got. Okay, so let's start with layout planning for hospitals. Why is this so important? And we changed the focus from an operational and technical point of view to more strategic one. So these decisions have some kind of implications on a long term. So what is facility layout? What are the specific characteristics in hospitals? And how can we solve these problems to maximize what? What kind of objectives could we have here? Okay, so in general, let's start, because we're in a university, we start always with the definition. Facility location is simply an arrangement of everything, basically, needed for goods or delivery of a service. Okay, so facility is simply an entity that facilitates the performance of any job. It may be a hospital, manufacturing, cell, department, warehouse, whatever. Okay, so this is the basic definition, the arrangement of everything you need for the production or delivering a service. And it could be the functional departments of what in a hospital, oncology, radiology, and whatever. In a manufacturing warehouse, or also administration areas for factory, workshops or machines in a whole, so how to assign which job to which workstation, and also work centers in an open plan office or types of good in warehouses. Okay, so different types of, and it influenced directly including costs, work in process, lead times, but also productivity. Okay, so a bad layout lead to a lot of costs, bad efficiency, waiting times, and so on. So therefore, we would like to increase the efficiency of by planning a good layout. Okay, so what kind of types do we have? Fixed position layout is simply that we don't move the product itself because it's simply too huge, like a ship or like a train. So everything comes to this product instead of going through in the next case of product layout. So products common in assembly line production, for instance, car manufacturing, where you have this line. Maybe you've seen that once. You have the line and the car is moving and everyone is coming and putting some kind of tiers or doors or an engine into the car, and the car is moving through the line. Then we have the process layout, which flexible to handle basically a wide variety of products with different manufacturing routes. This is often used in job shops manufacturing, but also service operations like in a hospital. So departments, different departments are fixed, but the patient has different routes through these departments. Okay, and then the cellular layout, so in a factory producing different types of, let's say, electronic devices, mobile phones, laptops, something like this. And the production cells might be set up where each cell is responsible for assembling a specific type of component, the outer part or the chip or something like this. Okay, so because in the hospital we have this process layout or service systems, we know that different patients go from different departments. So the department themselves, they are fixed. They are somehow arranged in the hospital, but the patient has or could have different paths. So you could see here that could be admitted to a surgery, but then moved first of all to an X-ray and then to the actual surgery, or another one is admitted to the ear, nose, throat department, and then going to the treatment room, conservative treatment, something like this. But every of them is done in an inpatient treatment department and then has to be discharged. Okay, so the departments are fixed in a hospital, and then the patient has to move through different departments depending on the treatment requirements. Okay, so what is layout planning? We had the what is layout, now what is the layout planning? So we plan the arrangement of organizational units, in our case departments, oncology, radiology, and so on, that are required for production of goods in a manufacturing or the provision of services in a hospital. Okay, within, of course, a border of a building. Okay, so there's some kind of building already there, and now we have to plan the units within the hospital. Okay, so this is rather strategic level, okay, of decision making. However, slowly we are also moving to a more operational or tactical one, because it's also possible to have some kind of portable walls where we can rearrange the departments. But the traditional one, we have a hospital, we have fixed rooms with fixed walls, and then we have to decide which room should be which department. Okay, so it's rather strategic. And then we have this kind of result where we, for instance, have a reception here, a waiting room for the patients, and then they either go to the treatment one room or to the second one, or we can rearrange that and we say, okay, the reception's here, and then the waiting room is on the same row, and then the treatment rooms are next to each other. Okay, so that could also be one possibility, and the question is, what is better? Which one of them, the left or the right one? So this depends, of course, on our objective. But before we go to this, what kind of objective we'd like to achieve, we have different types of layout problems. Okay, so service system layout. Okay, so we have this emergency facilities in a hospital, and all these problems have different objectives. So for an emergency department, we would like to have some kind of pleasant environment for the patient, that them feel comfortable, or different office structures possible. We have the classical manufacturing layout problem, where the objective is clearly on minimizing the costs, material handling costs, but also providing a safe workplace, okay, and a flow between the different stations. Then the warehouse layout, where again we are concerned with the cost and to try to minimize the storage cost, but for storing materials, but also products, final ones, work in progress products. Or the non-traditional one, where we, for instance, try to make a good layout for keys on a typewriter or linear placement problems. Okay, so, and now the objectives. Of course, we have this traditional transport costs, where we would like to minimize the room cost, handling costs, but also congestion. This is maybe relevant for hospitals, so that we don't want to have too many patients in one room waiting. But also rearrangement costs. When we realize, oh, we make a mistake and we could rearrange it in a better way, that has also some costs involved. And some quality issues, because if they have to go too long from one room to another one, maybe we could have some kind of patient harm that could be involved, or the staff that needs to travel too long internally or between different buildings within a hospital. Okay, so decision makers would like to have these kind of qualitative and quantitative measures that they would like to improve, and in practice, of course, we would like to satisfy all these issues instead of focusing just on a cost or just on a quality issues, because we have to meet this trade-off, okay, and to balance the cost and the quality. Okay, so when we want to minimize the transport intensity and therefore cost, so transport costs are minimized if the transport intensity is minimized. This is indirectly related. And what is the transport intensity? So it's simply the sum of products of traveled distance and the transported amount of products or patients or something like this between the organization unit H and I. Okay, so we sum everything up. So it depends how often we have to go between room 1 and room 2 and how many patients do we have to transfer between these two rooms. And the transport cost is simply the multiplication of some kind of cost rate. Okay, so here in this case we have KHR. So in general, if we would to neglect that the cost rate depends on the unit, this is often not really realistic. Okay, so this is often not true. Okay, so maybe the question why? So why do we differentiate between the cost rates? So why is it different if we go from A to B department or from C to D? Why could they include different costs? What could that be? Why is it necessary to differentiate between the cost rates? And cost rates doesn't matter what it is and how it is measured. Maybe in minutes, how long I will need to go from A to B or C to D. Could be costs, transporting some material, some equipment. What do you think why it's important to differentiate between the departments? So imagine you have so 3 floors in a hospital. It is different, right? If you have to move from A to B on the same floor, or you have to take the steps, right? It takes much longer if you don't have the lift or whatever. Okay, so this is why we differentiate between the cost rates. So this is important, otherwise it's simply not realistic. And then we also have to always keep in mind that we need some kind of rearrangement costs in order to preserve flexibility. If we want to have some kind of flexibility, also with the patients and also clinical part, we have to take into account that we might have to rearrange the departments. So during Corona, for instance, they closed several departments and just moved only Corona patients into that. Okay, so they simply reserved all the departments that were not life-threatening, and they reserved that for Corona patients. Okay, so that means from medium to long-term decisions, and we want to avoid high adjustments and relocation costs, of course, okay? Simply because it is also costly for the patients if their department has been closed and they cannot get their cancer treatment, for instance, because their department is now reserved for Corona patients. Their treatment is postponed, and that could have high costs there. Then constraints, of course, we have this kind of area constraints, positioning constraint, and budget constraint. Everything has to be paid. So in area constraints, we have the area we have that is available. We cannot change that. We have available buildings, and we have to plan with that. And positioning constraints just means that we cannot have different departments in the same room. We also have to take into account that we have some kind of maximum distance between some kind of units, or the minimum distance, because sometimes radiology, because of some technical equipment, they have to be more distant to, for instance, children hospital or children unit. Okay, and then we have the adjacency requirements, so the neighboring requirements between different units. Sometimes it's good when they are close together, sometimes it's better if they are not that, or it's not important if they are close together. And the budget I already mentioned. And then we have to differentiate between the static and the dynamic. So static is clear, okay, we have the building, we arrange the department once, and that's it. Okay, then we have a planning horizon of several years, okay, and we generate the layout and won't change that anymore. And in the dynamic version, we could include also changes in demand or production volume and some kind of product mix. So in our case, if we see that we have a trend, some kind of trend, or a corona pandemic, whatever, and we have on a short notice to change that, we can rearrange the department locations. Or when we see that due to climate change we have some kind of particular diseases that are more common, then we can also rearrange the departments. So we can break down the entire large and long-term horizon, shorter periods, of course. Okay, so and then we can, for instance, consider 1 year, we change that into a second year, so we move it a bit, then we change it again to the third period, and so on. So we could rearrange that, but of course we have some costs that we have to consider. Okay, and how to model these kind of problems. Of course we could have a quadratic assignment problem, and this is the most common one and discrete one. We will come to that in a minute. Classical mixed integer program. We could also use fancy machine learning for neural networks, but also graph theory. We will also come to that later. Okay, let's start with the solution procedures, because often you can solve it in using exact method. I think branch and bound is you are familiar with. Bendis decomposition, or also dynamic program if you have some time included. And then you have, if you cannot solve it, and you often cannot do that because they're pretty difficult, they're NP hard in general, and then we can have some kind of heuristics and use some kind of construction and improvement heuristic. Maybe you remember that. Then we have the meta heuristic and some kind of hybrid approach. Okay, so that was in general, and now what are the specific characteristics of hospitals? Nice layout planning, and hospitals have a particular, have some kind of particular requirements, and not as like warehouses, for instance. Okay, so first of all, we again start with the definition. This is the arrangement, so that we had that already, the planning the arrangement, but this time of function, department, and wards in a hospital. So the relative position to each other, in such a manner that the travel distances for patient but also for staff are minimized. Okay, so the main focus is now to minimize the travel distance. Okay, we are not so focused on the costs, which are of course indirectly included, but here we try to make the distances for the patients as small as possible. Okay, then we have different additional criteria, differentiation of travel distance for employees and patients. So, if an ill patient cannot move, this is something different than having travel time for visitors, for instance. Okay. Then, of course, the total costs of building activity, some kind of rearrangement when we see, okay, that was not a good idea to arrange these two units far away from each other, and might be that we need some new construction. We saw that in one hospital where they built an entirely new surgical ward and built new surgery rooms. And of course we can have these conflicting objectives, okay, where we have to differentiate, do we want to minimize cost, do we want to minimize travel cost, or to maximize quality? It's always the same, and the objective for us in a hospital is of course that we want to somehow increase in general quality, but this layout planning directly influences process efficiency, so the daily operations planning, but also scheduling for the staff, for the patients, for the operation rooms, logistics cost, okay, patient transportation planning. We had that before. If they're far away from each other, the unit, the patient have to wait, they have to be transported, they have to come back, and so on. So the travel distances are directly influenced by the layout planning. Okay, and a process layout for the hospital as a service systems, we know that patients have different paths through a hospital, through different functional wards because of their treatment requirements, and we have to plan the layout according to this expectation. Of course, not every patient will go as planned, might be, but often they have some kind of expected. First of all, diagnostics, and then surgery, then maybe discharge unit. Okay, so hospital layout planning, we would like to make it according to the expected patient flows at least, and the objective is to assign functional departments, oncology, radiology, and so on, to minimize the travel distances, because we assume that this also has direct impact on the patient quality, or the service quality, let's say. Okay, so what kind of data do we need? Of course, the number of functional departments that have to be arranged. We have the required space and also shape. Not every department has maybe the same shape. In maternity units, sometimes they have some kind of circle. I don't know exactly why, but they have it pretty often. Then available rooms and frequency of movement. So how often do these departments interact with each other? Okay, if a surgery always have a radiology beforehand, then of course they have a high interaction between them. And then facility restrictions. So for instance, the intensity care unit requires maybe some kind of heavy equipment, and then they cannot be assigned to a specific room due to some kind of static reasons or some kind of physics I'm not aware of. But we have to take this into account as well. And then the proximity relation, so how close should the units be to each other? Okay. Maybe sometimes they have to be close, sometimes not. And then this means that we have this kind of process flow analysis, which is a systematic approach used to understand but also optimize the flow of materials, in our case, patients, but also information within a hospital. Okay, and this is used to identify simply some kind of inefficiencies, some kind of bottlenecks, but also areas for improvement. Okay. This is often used then within the hospital. And what are the negative impacts versus the replanning costs? Okay, so if we have long-term changes, okay, due to some kind of high reorganization costs, so that means if we have a bad layout, okay, then that means we have delays, we have appointment cancellation, or might be some kind of absolute needless covered distances, because we have to go through a corridor, but the room is next to the ward. Dissatisfaction of patients, of course, if they have to have some kind of delays, have to also wait and travel too long. Increased workload, of course, for the employees, because they have simply to walk much more, and waiting times of doctors, because they also have to arrive, first of all, to this particular ward. Okay, and the cost for replanning of the layout, okay, then we have this kind of cost of for rebuilding and some kind of interim solutions, because we know we cannot simply close a hospital. It's a 24/7 service. We cannot say, okay, come back in 2 months, we're then ready with a renovation, and then we'll come back. So it's simply not possible, and you also should get the time not only for staff but also for patients to get used to this new structure. Okay. And we have basically two strategies. The first one, so to how to readjust that, right? So first strategy is you can start with small adjustments, but of course there are only little change, okay? And that means you have only little improvement, okay? And you would like to use current and real data for these rearrangements, okay? But from the staff perspective, also from the patient perspective, these changes are likely to be accepted, and it's easier to accept these small changes, small improvements. Strategy 2 is to rearrange that in a significant way, but then we have a strong influence on the cost, and we could have really strong improvement. Okay, but the problem is that layout and real data they don't fit together very well, at least on a longer period. Okay, so for short term, yes, so we have, for instance, Corona, and then we arrange everything with a high cost, high improvement, but also really significant changes. But 1 year later, everything is over, and then you have readjusted again. So real data and significant changes in a layout, it's always difficult, let's say. Okay, so let's start with a quadratic assignment problem, where the problem is to allocate the emergency, or let's say the departments, different departments, to the rooms we have available. So we have a two-dimensional problem, and each facility, each ward, has to be adjusted to this particular room, and each one has an individual length and width. Okay, so every department requires some kind of space, okay, but requires the same space. This is our assumption. Okay, and so every unit has the identical place requirement, okay, and they are roughly modeled. And that could look like that. So you have Ward A and B, radiology and oncology, or something like this. Frequency means simply how often they interact with each other. Maybe some kind of 9 patients per day are sent back and forth. And so these are the wards. And here you have the rooms. You have 4 rooms. And there are 10 meters between. So from one room going to 2, you need to travel 10 meters. And from one room to the 4th room, you need to go 20 meters. Okay, so this is, and there's a block in the middle, so you cannot cross that. Okay, so you always have to go this or this direction. Okay, and then you have these 4 departments. Okay, so let's have a look how to arrange that. So we could use the A department and move it to the 1st room. Okay, so till now nothing happened. So we don't know if this is good or bad. We can assign then B to next to it, and now we know that between A and B they have a frequency of 9. Okay, so we know, okay, we have to travel 10 meters from A to B, and we have 9 patients per day that they have to interact with each other. Okay, so and then placing A to C to next to A. So how long does it take from B to C? How many meters do they have to go? From B to C. Yeah. Oh, okay. Can you hear me better now? Okay. Sorry. So if you go from A to B, it's 10 meters. If you want to go from B to C, how meters do you have to go? Thank you, 20, exactly. And they have, so between A and C, this one, they have only 3 interactions. So the question arises, is that really necessary to have them together? Because B and C, so these ones, they have 12 interactions, okay? But they have to walk through A till they reach C, okay? So the question is this really optimal? And then we have D as the last one, and then we can determine the objective function, which is simply 9 times 10 plus 3 times 10. So 10 is always the meters, and times the frequency. Okay, and we have objective function which is 830 weighted meters, okay, weighted by the frequencies. Okay, or let's say if we have to walk 9 times, then this is overall 830 meters that we have to walk, maybe per day or something like this. Okay, so this is the first layout, so just simply A, B, C, D without thinking about the frequencies. But if we simply rearrange that and replace D by C, so we switch them to, with each other, then you can instantly decrease the distance to 600 meters, okay, with a relatively simple rearrangement. Okay, so but you see you have 4 opportunities, so 4 departments. How many possibilities do you have to arrange these A, B, C, D to these 4 rooms? Okay, So you have a lot of, and this is a small example, you have a lot of opportunities that you can arrange that. Okay, so the assumptions for the classical problem is facilities with P equal locations. Okay, so we have some kind of wards and we would like to arrange them to rooms in a hospital. So we have P equal locations and we have P equal units. Okay, and these have to be arranged. So we have the same number of rooms as the same number of units. Okay, now we have to somehow to arrange them in a perfect way. And the question, what is perfect? And the distance is denoted by djk between some kind of location j and location k. Okay, and we assume that within the department, so if A is in room 1, then we don't have to travel at all. Okay, that makes sense. And we could have different kind of distance measures like the L1, the Manhattan distance, or L2 norm, the Euclidean distance. Basically, it doesn't matter. You can also go and measure the time you need, how many minutes. You could have volumes, costs, whatever. So for the optimization model, it doesn't matter what kind of measure you have. At the end of the day, you would like to minimize it. Okay, and so for the model, it doesn't matter. It's simply how you interpret the result. Okay, do you want to minimize the travel distance? Do you want to minimize the travel minutes, and so on? So it's simply for the decision maker important, but not for the model. Okay. Then the assumptions on the objective. So we have to differentiate between the transport intensity, which is THI. So the quantity unit per period you have to transport from one unit H to the other unit I, from radiology to surgery, for instance. Okay. And we assume that this is known. We know how many patients we have to move from A to B. Okay, and again, we assume that within one room, within one department, we don't have any kind of transport intensity. And then we have the costs for material or equipment and medical equipment we have to transport, and they are proportional to the transported quantity and also the covered distances. Okay, so we assume that it's a linear relation. The more we have to move, the more we have to pay. Okay, and T times D are the transport costs per period between unit H and I if they are arranged in location J and K. So if A is arranged to room 1 and unit I is arranged and assigned to room B, the second one, then we have these costs in between. Okay. And the objective is to minimize the costs. Okay, so the transport costs basically between the different units. Okay. So the decision variables, and we have only one type of decision variable, H, X, HI. So I start again. So X, I, J is 1 if organization unit H is assigned to location J. So if oncology is assigned to room 1, okay, then it's 1, otherwise it's 0. Okay, and B is assigned to room 2 and so on. And the objective function has 4 terms. Okay, so we have the intensity, so how many patients do we have or material do we have to transport between these two, the distance, okay, between these two organization units, and X here and X there. So if there would only be one X, that makes no sense. Only if we open a new organization unit, only then this counts. Okay, only then we have distances we have to overcome, and we have also the intensity. And why do you think this is difficult to solve? It's a very simple, I mean, looks a bit fancy, but it's a simple model. So what do you think? Why it's difficult to solve that? You can already see it here. What do you think? difficult for the solver. What is different to this objective function than to others we had till now? Something different? Something new? What about the decision variables? Or is it because of the 4 terms? Because of the 4 sums? What do you think? I have time. Yeah, thanks. Exactly. This is because we multiply 2 decision variables together. That comes, and here we can have this non-linear term over here. Okay. So till now we had always some kind of linear objective function. As soon as you multiply different decision variables with each other, you get this non-linearity in here. The good thing here is still that it's quadratic. Okay. You don't have some kind of x and y. Here it's simply that you could also have a quadratic term, and this is where the formulation comes from. So you have a non-linear term, and then we have the constraints. Every organization unit is assigned exactly to one location. So, for instance, radiology cannot be assigned to room 1 and to room 2. Okay, that's not possible. This holds for every unit. Then, for every location is assigned to exactly one organization unit. So the other way around, basically every room can only host one organizational unit. You can see it's a very simple model, but you have many combinations, and you have this nonlinear term in the objective function. Okay. And here you have the binary decision variables, H, J. Okay, so an example. So you have 3 units, as I said, oncology, radiology, and internist, or something like this. So these are the transport intensities, okay, between 1 and 2 and 1 and 3. You see that on the diagonal you don't have any transport intensities and no distances, and ABC are the rooms. Okay. And of course you have here in this matrix you have a symmetric one. No, it's not. So because I just wanted to say that it's not always possible to have a symmetric one. You could have one, but it's not necessarily the case, because we talked about stairs, lifts, and so on, if it's not on the same floor, and so on. But still on the diagonal you don't have any distances within the same room, and also no transport intensity within the same organizational unit. Okay, and here you see from the radiology to the cardiology you have 3 transport intensities. From 1 to the third one, which is internist, you have 7. So you see that here we have more transport intensities than, let's say, between 3 and 2. Okay, so you have to take this into account. And then our objective function, and here's only the first ones that are given. Okay, you have these 3 times 1, so the intensity times the distance, so 3 times 1, and then the decision variable. So if they are placed so if unit 1 is placed assigned to room A, and the second unit is assigned to B, then we have here 1s, and then we have to take this transport intensity times distances, the weighted distances, into account, and so on. So we have that for the first units, first 2 units, so first and second, if they are assigned to room A and C, if they are assigned to B and A, and so on. Okay, and I think you have then 81 terms in your objective function. So your objective function is really long. Okay, so I think it's 3 times, because you have 3 units units, 3 distance, 3 times 3 times 3, 27 times 3, yeah, so 81 terms here. Okay, but of course you don't need these diagonal ones, so you can subtract them from your long objective function. Okay, so this is why you end up with 36 terms. Okay, if the distances of this quadratic assignment problem are symmetric, so that means if these ones are symmetric, so if these matrices are symmetric, then of course the objective function simplifies. Okay, so you can now have this p minus 1, or the other way around, if you have the transport intensities which are symmetric, then you can here have simplification, which is not really significant. It's still a very hard problem to solve. Okay, but you can a bit reduce the problem size. Okay. So the QIP problem is extremely difficult to solve, at least to optimality for real-world instances, because we don't have a hospital with 4 rooms and 4 departments. We often have really huge hospitals, and that means we need some kind of heuristics, and if you look in the literature, you will find a bunch of that. And for the hospital application, we need some kind of assumption. So first of all, we assume that the number of functional departments or wards are the same as the number of locations. So you have 4 rooms, so you have 4 departments, and then you have to allocate them and assign them. And on every location, there will be assigned only 1 functional department. We had that already. And every functional department is assigned exactly to 1 room. Okay, we also had that in our constraints. Okay, and what is also a simplified assumption that every department needs the same area, needs the same space, which could be unrealistic and often unrealistic. And the objective is to arrange these departments in such a way that the distance or the weighted distances are minimized. Okay, for the patients, because of quality considerations. However, we know that layout with the locations all having the same shape is an input and not an output, and only the decision about assigning units to locations can be made. Okay. And of course, we had that already several times. It's difficult to solve, at least for real-world problems. Okay. Okay, so now to overcome all these issues, we start with a theoretical or graph theoretical approach. And so to overcome this, we would like to use a heuristic that builds on graph theory. Okay, and we want to decide which operating rooms and organizational units should be neighbors, should be adjacent. Okay. And for this, we would like to have a preference matrix. So we are talking to hospital representatives, and they tell us which units should be close to each other, and they would like to have these closer to each other. So the official, they can indicate which departments should be neighbors or not. And the goal is so the goal is to develop a layout that, of course, maximize these preferences. So we are going away from the logistical part and the logistical aspect. We don't want to minimize some kind of distances or travel times, but now we want to maximize the preferences given by the officials, so hospital officials. Okay. And the solution is using an undirected graph. Nodes are the units, and the weighted edges, how close should they be. So based on the preference from the hospital officials, we know how close they should be. They have some kind of weight, and we take that into account. So we want to find a planar graph with maximal sum of these edge weights. Who knows what is a planar graph? Just by curiosity, you don't have to define it. Heard it? Someday? Ever heard that? No? Okay. It's a pretty simple definition. So it's a graph that can be drawn on a plane, a two-dimensional plane, without any of its edges crossing each other. So pretty simple. Okay. And we have that here as an example. Okay. And every layout can be represented as a planar graph with one node representing the environment. This is this one. This is for technical reasons. So let's assume that's the entry point of the hospital, something like this. And two nodes are adjacent if there's some kind of edge connecting them. Okay. Okay. So this is basically a very simple representation, and Professor Nickel once said that one hospital director told him he tried to plan this kind of layout for several weeks and he couldn't make it up, so he couldn't make a plan. And then Professor Nickel asked him if then planarity is proven, so you can have there some kind of methods to prove if this is possible to draw that on a plane without that the edges are crossing each other. And they found out that it wasn't able. So he was simply not stupid, it was simply not possible with this arrangement to draw a plane without crossing the edges. Okay? And so it was simply not possible. But if you can do that, you can have this kind of optimal layout arrangement. So this layout arrangement is based on the preference matrix given by the hospital officials. Okay, and the higher the preference, the higher the importance of that these two should be close together. These two departments should be close together. Okay, so if the officials say 4 and 5, they should be definitely together, then of course we will try, or the model and the method will try to make it as close as possible. Okay, so what is a maximum planar graph? It's simple, a plan or graph if and only if the characteristics of planarity gets lost when adding a further edge. What does it mean? So you have here these kind of nodes that are connected, okay, and I think here it's better. So if you would connect this node and this one, okay, we would cross this edge, and therefore it's not a planar graph anymore, it's not a maximal planar graph anymore. And our goal is to find such a maximal planar graph because then we can assign as many departments as possible into this hospital. Okay, so that would be then optimal. So our goal is to find such a maximal planar graph. Okay, so before we go into this detail, we need some kind of definitions for graph theory. Maybe it will help you in other lectures as well. So we start that A is connected, undirected planar graph. Undirected simply means that there are no arrows here, okay? So they are connected, but it's not that it goes from here to here, for instance, okay? So that means undirected, okay? And the graph consists of nodes, V, and edges, E, and graphical representation in a plane. Okay, so by representing this graph, the plane gets subdivided into an inner facet and outer facet. Okay, so let's start with the inner facet. So this is the area, the plane is bounded by nodes and edges, where first of all bounding nodes and edges from an elementary circle is given. So an elementary circle means simply that the nodes and edges must be distinct from and form a closed loop. Okay, that's pretty simple. And then the second one, a pairwise intersection of two facets is empty. So the intersection between two facets is empty, meaning they do not share any common area together. And third, no subset of a facet contains both conditions, one and the second. That ensures simply that the facet cannot be divided into smaller facets. Okay, that meet the same criteria, 1 and 2. Okay, and the outer facet is simply that is covering the inner facets. Okay, let's have an example. I think that's maybe easier. Here we have the inner facet, okay, which is 2, 3, 5, 8. So this is the inner one. This is obviously an inner one, that one. So you have nodes within, and you have one outer facet, which is 1, 2, 8, and 7. Okay, so you have this one, and the facets are always determined by gamma. Okay, and you can see gamma and then 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, for instance. This is the inner facet. Okay, and all facets are then the set of it, so it's capital gamma. Okay, so that means a graph is now represented by the set of nodes, set of edges, and set of its facets. Okay. Okay. So then we need a definition of triangle and deltahedron. So if we have graph consisting of nodes and edges, then the triangle is simply a facet which is bounded by 3 nodes and 3 edges. Okay, this is simply a triangle. Okay, so I think this is clear. Maybe you can still draw it. Okay. You have 3 nodes, sorry, and you have 3 edges. And the deltahedron, that means all facets of the graph are in triangles. Okay, okay. Then it is called deltahedron. So, and the set of triangles is capital delta and G is described by this triple. So the set of nodes, set of edge, set of triangles. So it could also be here then. Okay, another triangle, here another triangle. Okay, and then you have a deltahedron. It simply consists of triangles. Okay, and maybe what is also important that it doesn't necessarily need to be a line. Okay, so it could also be that is something like this. Okay, so it's still a triangle. It's not like from geometry. Okay, it's still a triangle because it connects 3 edges and 3 nodes and 3 edges. Okay, so it doesn't have to be a straight line. Yeah. So the difference between inner and outer? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Only the inner ones. Okay. Because the outer is then this, which covers all the triangles, right? And that cannot be done. So it could be, but it's not necessary. So this is only the inner. Good question. Thank you. Okay. So example again. So we have the following graph. We have a deltahedron. We have 6 nodes. Where's my? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 nodes. We have the edges connecting all of them. Okay, and we have these triangles showing that 3 nodes and 3 edges connecting them. Okay, here one, that one, and this is what I try to show here. Is also one. Okay, and that one is also here. Okay, connecting 6, 4, and 1. Doesn't have to be a line. Okay, so maybe this is easier then to see. And this is a maximal planar graph because as soon as we would add an edge here between 6 and 3, we would cross this edge, and then it's not a planar graph anymore. Okay. So delta is a triangle, then the nodes I, J, K, and as well as the edges connecting these nodes with each other to delta. So the triangles denoted by delta, I, J, K, the nodes. Okay, what is a dual graph? So let's assume we have this graph here, okay, consisting of our nodes, edges, and also triangles. And then we have a dual. This is called with a D, dual graph with nodes and edges, which is built as follows. So the dual one includes exactly 1 node for every facet. Okay, so if we see that this here one is the facet, then we get one node over here. Okay, if this is here a triangle and one facet, then here in the middle that would be a node. Okay, so every facet of the original graph is then one node in the dual graph. And then the dual one includes exactly one edge for every edge in the edge of the primal one, so the original one, that separates two facets. Okay? Okay, so that means if we have here one representative node in the dual, here one, then we have one edge connecting them with each other. Just maybe showing that. So in this case, we would have one here. This is the. Do I have another color? Green on green is not that good, right? Let's try it with the red. So here you see that we represent one facet, one triangular. We use one node in the dual. Here we have one facet, one node, and here, and then because we know that they are connected, we have these connections over here. Okay, so that would be the dual version of it. Okay, and the theorem says that the dual graph of a planar graph is again planar, so we can again represent it on a plane. Okay. Application of dual graphs. So if we have the original, the planar graph that represents the proximity relations between several organization units, then it's possible to derive some kind of representing block layout using the dual graph GD in red here. And here's an example. So you have this kind of the planar graph. This is the original one, again with 6 nodes. And then what we can do, this is what I try to write here, that we have here nodes within some planar. So within each facet you have one node. Okay, in the dual. So the red ones are the dual ones. And then you can connect them. So, and I said, again, it doesn't have to be a linear one, but you see here, B and H is connected, H and E is connected, and so on. Okay. And therefore, you can now have these kind of blocks. Okay, you have the blocks that you would like to assign to each other. Okay, you don't have this kind of planar graph anymore, but you have a really clear structure in the dual theory, in the dual graph, and you can put and place the blocks to each other, which is easier than having this kind of nodes and edges. Okay, so the planar graph and the dual graph, they have some kind of characteristics. So the number of edges in the the planar or primal, the original one, and the dual one are the same. Okay, the number of edges. The number of nodes, which represent facets in a primal one, in the planar one, equals the number of facets in the dual one, or vice versa, right? The other way around. Then the number of edges of a facet in the dual equals the number of edges in the planar one, and then which are connected to the corresponding node. Okay, and the dual of the dual is again the planar graph. So it's basically like the optimization model when you have the primal one and the dual one, right? So, and you can transfer and translate back to the primal one. That's the same here. It's the dual of a dual is the planar graph, the original graph then, again. Okay, so maximal graphs and delta hedrons. We know that a planar graph is maximal if and only if it is a delta hedron. So if you want to generate maximal graphs, then simply construct a delta hedron. Simply construct a graph consisting only of triangles, okay? And then you get one delta hedron, and then you get instantly maximal graph. Okay, and this helps us because then we can arrange the units optimal to the rooms. Okay, and the idea of a proof, it's just a sketch. We want to show that if you have a maximal planar graph, then it has to be a delta hedron. So if G is maximal planar graph, okay, but we assume for now it's not a delta hedron. Here it's shown. Okay, you have a facet with 4 or more bounding nodes. Okay, so you have here 3 and then it goes further. So that means this is maximal planar graph, but it's not a delta hedron. As soon as you draw this line over here, okay, then you get this triangle, okay, and it's not maximal anymore, okay, and this is basically the idea of it. The other way is pretty straightforward. If it's a delta hedron, then you can see instantly that's a maximal planar graph, so it follows from the definition of a delta, basically delta hedron. So if you don't have a triangle, okay, then you can always insert some kind of edge and you get a larger one. So it cannot be maximal one. So it's a contradiction, and this is some kind of proof, at least an idea of a proof. Okay, so if we want to solve a layout problem, okay, we can reduce this planar graph to a delta hedron, okay, and we would like to maximize the edge weights, okay, that are again based on the preference matrix given by the officials, hospital officials. So, and we can do that by finding a delta hedron, by trying to draw a graph that is maximal planar, okay, and in turn is a delta hedron. If we can do that, then we can also solve it, okay? Because we have the following relations for delta hedrons. If we have a graph consisting of nodes, edges, and our triangles, and we have n nodes, m edges, then we know that we have a particular number of triangles, then we have this following relation. So for instance, the number of edges m is 3 times the nodes minus 6. So we see that this is has a linear dependency. Before we had a quadratic one, right? In a normal graph we have always a quadratic relation, but here for delta hedrons we can say that we have 3 times n minus 6 edges in a delta hedron. Okay, so this is the number of triangles, and this relation also holds. What derives or what follows from this relationship is that with this we can derive an upper bound for the sum of edge weights, so basically for the objective function. If we add 3 times n minus 6 biggest values of the preference matrix, then we can derive an upper bound. Okay, so it won't be better than that. So we can solve that. So we have a preference matrix, let's say oncology, then cardiology, radiology, and maybe internist, so internal medicine. And then same for here, cardiology, radiology, and internal. And then we ask, so the diagonal is neglected, and then we ask the hospital officials, what do you think? What kind of preference would you like to have? And they say, well, I don't know, 3 and 5 and 1 and whatever, 8, 7, 1, 3, 4, I don't care. Maybe something between 1 and 10, or that could be normalized, and between 0 and 1. And then you have this preference matrix here, okay? And then it said that so we have 4 nodes, okay? We have 4 nodes for wards. That means we take now the 3 times n, 12 minus 6 is 6 again, so we take the 6 largest values, okay, which is 8, another 8, 7, 5, do we have something else? So we have 4, 5, and 6, okay? So if we add these values, that's the absolute maximum objective function value, okay? you cannot get a better result. Okay? Okay. But why and maybe I can ask you, why is it the upper bound? Why can't we guarantee that we always reach the best result? What do you think? So the hospital representative they said, these are our preferences, and we know that the maximum available or achievable as 8 plus 5 plus 7 plus 5 plus 8 plus 4 plus 4. Okay? So this is the absolute maximum. That would be the best result. Why cannot we necessarily achieve that? What do you think? I mean, then we don't need any kind of optimization anymore. We simply say, okay, then we place O and R together, C and O, C and R, and so on. Why it's not possible to do that? I mean, always. Sometimes it's possible. That's why it's an upper bound. We can achieve that, but it's not necessarily the case. What do you think? What could be the reason why we cannot achieve that physically, maybe? And you have to imagine this is a hospital, right? And they give you the preferences. They say, I would like to have OS or oncology and radiology and together. So we're adding the number of edges, right? What do you think? Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. Sometimes physically it's not possible to use the links, right? Or the edges. It's simply not possible to have them together. And some edges cannot be used and cannot be selected. So it's always in some kind of upper bound. Okay. Then, of course, we need some kind of heuristic. Okay. So this is the general idea and description of this heuristic. So given some kind of preference matrix, which is over here, and then your task is now or the heuristic task is now to sort the sequence of rows. So we go through a row, okay, and check where the sum is maximum, okay. So 3 plus 5 plus 1 is 9, and so on. So, and then you check all the row sums, because what you want to know is you want to understand the connection of one unit to all other departments, right? So you want to know and identify this department which has the most connections with others, or with the highest intensity, with the highest preference, okay? So then you know, okay, this department should be somehow central, because it seems to be very important, because the hospital officials said that they have highest priority here and highest priority here and so on. So oncology or radiology seems to be very central, because it has the highest preferences connected to other departments. So this is what you want to understand here. And then you build an initial deltahedron from 4 nodes with the highest row sums. So you choose the department with the highest sum, okay, and you choose 4 nodes, and then the remaining nodes will be integrated in this graph according to the decreasing row sums. So it's some kind of greedy algorithm again. So take always the node with the highest preferences, and in our case the highest row sum. Okay, so they always have to be included into the triangle where the objective function value is increased. So this is the greedy approach here. Okay, and this is the official algorithm. So you have the preference matrix. You start with calculating all the row sums of the preferences. Then you determine the 4 nodes with the highest row sums. And then you define the graph with nodes, edges, and the triangles. And calculating, of course, the objective function based on this graph. And then the next iterations are to choose the next nodes that have the maximum preferences. Okay, and determine again, update the new triangle and set the new graph with nodes, edges, and triangles, and then you go as long as you don't have any nodes that have to be assigned anymore. Okay, so then you are done. Okay, and the output is the maximal graph, which is a deltahedron, so it's a synonym. Okay, so you have a graph which has nodes and triangles with the sum of edge weights with a maximum objective function value, z. Okay, let's have a look at an example. You have now 6 nodes, 6 departments, okay, and you have the preference given by the hospital representative. So you see that between 1 and department 2, the preference is 4, then 6. So you see that there's a high preference between 1 and 6, for instance, with 9, and so on. Again, the diagonal is empty. Okay, so which ones to choose? Based on the algorithm, we should choose the first 4 with the highest sum, which are in our case that one, so the first department, the third one, the fifth one, and the sixth one. So these are the highest values, the first 4 highest values. Okay, so this is our initialization. Okay, we choose exactly these nodes with all the connecting edges and the corresponding triangles. Okay, and now we determine the objective function, which is 6 plus 8 plus 9 and so on. So we have an objective function of 38. Okay. Okay, that means the second department and the fourth department are left. Okay, and the question is which one to choose. Okay. So let's have a visualization here. So we know we have 1, 3, 5, and 6. We already selected that, and we have all the edges. Okay. And now, which one to choose? The second department or the fourth department? Which one would you choose next to include it into the graph? According to the greedy philosophy, let's say. Which one to choose? The second or the fourth department as next one? So we have already a graph consisting of 4 nodes with a high sum. Which one now to choose? The second. So you have 50-50 chance. 2 or 4? Who's for 2? Who's for 4? Okay, thanks. You won. Okay, so that means we now have to choose the fourth department and include it somewhere. Okay, because it has the highest. Let's see here in the table again. So here it's 19 over 17, so we take the fourth department. And the question is now how to include it into this triangle, into this one, so include it in here, here, or here. Okay, so this is the question. And now we can check the objective function, how it will increase. Okay, if we include 4 into this, the triangle 1, 3, and 5. So if we would include that here, okay, then our objective function would increase by 11. So where the 2, 7, and 2 are coming from, okay? So let's have a look in the table again. So now we have the fourth department, and it should be included into the 1, 3, and 5. So we are here. So 1, which is 2, 3, which has a preference of 7, and 5, which has a preference of 2. So 2 plus 7 plus 2. Okay, so this is where the 11 comes from. Okay, and we can also place it in 1, 3, 6. Okay, so 1, 3, 6, we could also include that. We would get a 12, then here or here. Okay, so we can choose basically which one we could, because 12 and 12 are the same, so it doesn't matter actually where to place it, but let's do it. Let's choose that one. So we include the fourth node into the planar graph now, and that means our objective value function increases from 38 plus 12 to 50. Okay, so we have increased our objective function. Okay, so the next iteration is simply to include our only left department, which is the second one. Okay, so this is left. And again, we have several opportunities to include that into the 3, 1, 3, 4. So here, included here, here, or here. So we have 6 possibilities. And of course, we take that one with the most, with the highest value to improve our maximization objective function. Okay. So that means we have now an objective function value of 36, 63. Too much in a German language. Okay, so that means we have assigned all the nodes to the planar graph. We have now a deltahedron. We have a maximal planar graph, which is the same. Okay, and we have on the edges the weights. Okay, based on the preferences of the officials from the hospital. Okay, and of course we need that an additional node, so-called environmental node, that is exterior from technical reasons, that now have the task to get an outer facet. Okay, so we have an outer facet, we have all the inner facets, and all the polyhedron is then made up of different triangles. Okay, so okay, and you, by the way, your question up in the outer and inner facet, and you can see here that is exactly not this triangle. Okay, and if we look at a dual graph, so how that would look like, so we have all the nodes, and we all have these facets. On each facet now requires a node. You can see here, this is a facet, this one is a node, this here one is a facet between 1, 4, and 3. You know, here's a facet, and you get one node in the dual, and so on. And all the nodes are connected with each other through edges. Okay, and then we have a dual representation of the planar graph here. Okay, and then based on this dual graph, we can now have this kind of block structure. Okay, that is more easily to arrange with each other. So it could look like that, but not necessarily. Okay, and to conclude this session, Professor Nichols' one practical seminar, his students, they had the problem that the number of GPs in Germany has decreased over the years, and what they are doing is that they simply are trying to go into the same building. So they group each other with one building, with one practice. So often you have this kind of Gemeinschaftspraxen where you call and you have to, or you can choose between different GPs. And the goal or the objective is to meet some kind of quantitative factors, some kind of route optimization for the patients, but also for staff, some kind of qualitative factors, but also legal regulations they have to take into account within the building, and how to do the layout then in a best optimal way. And the graph optimization, or the route optimization is within the building, okay, so between the GPs, so where to place the toilets, the waiting room, the reception, and so on. And they use the graph theoretical approach and this quadratic assignment problem to solve that one, and use simulation for different scenarios. So what if we rearrange that, and what if the demand decreases for particular GP or for particular types of diseases and treatment. Okay, and and with this, I would like to thank you for attention. If there are no further questions, okay, then next time we will have the last lecture, official lecture on location analysis. and then the really last lecture will be simply on Q&A. Okay? Thank you for your attention. See you next week. Thank you.